having reached a place where I had absolutely nothing to lose, I prayed, and I prayed desperately. And for me, that was a turning point. And what happened after that is a miracle in its own right. I feel connected to something higher and greater than myself. My zest for life is back. And that experience has filled me with humility, I have to say. And it is something that's very subjective. It's extremely difficult to explain. I'm trying to work, get into the details, the granular details of how I got there.
Okay, guys, welcome to How to Believe in God. And kind of just a fun title, but if you're a person that is, let's say, of an atheistic bent, and you're one of those people that, like, you wish you could believe, you look at religious people and just the world just seems so simple to them and they seem to have this meaning, but you feel kind of like intellectually handcuffed, that you couldn't possibly believe in all these things because they seem too ridiculous. Well, this is the video for you. This is where I hope to give you reasons to persuade you that the religious endeavor or religious investigation is something that makes sense, that is logical, that isn't an intellectual compromise. So I'm going to hope to frame what the religious investigation is, to frame what the religious proposal is. What is this hypothesis? What is it like that we are proposing, that you enter into? And, hopefully this will help you on your journey in life in general, whatever conclusions you come up with. The clip that we just saw there, you might have recognized. It's a woman named Ayaan Hirsi, and she was originally supposed to be one of the four horsemen of the four atheistic horsemen, not the apocalypse, but like the opposite of that, along with Sam Harris and Hitchens and these very famous new atheists. And she was a very outspoken critic of religion, and she self-proclaims to have made fun of religious people, and I'm sure she did. And here she is trying to describe a religious experience that she had, and it's, I don't know if fun's the right word, but it's very fascinating to watch someone who has had much more of a materialistic, rationalistic mind trying to make sense of an encounter that engaged her in a way that she just did not even think possible. And basically what her conclusion is in this video is that it is an intensely subjective experience, and yet it is something that's powerful and something that she wants to tell the world about. And so even though it's so personal to her, right, she uses this word subjective, this subjectivity, she still wants to share this message with others because she believes that other people can have this same type of encounter. And this gets at to what a religious investigation is, or how multifaceted this type of investigation is. So if you're thinking of embarking on this, let's talk about the nature of this investigation, the nature of this question: is there a God? Is there not a God? These grand questions about reality. And I think the way that most people approach it, especially, I think it's a symptom or maybe just an emblem of just the way that we think today. We're very materialistically oriented, meaning material matter, like the world as a physical object to be manipulated, but is not inherently alive in any way. That's a very materialistic view frame. We tend to approach all questions, especially big questions like this, from a materialist perspective. And in fact, I think what you find that it's not actually just a material investigation. It's not just an objective investigation, and don't take my word for it. Here, let's hear from some atheists. And this comes up in every atheist-theist debate that I've ever watched. They talk about how there's no evidence for it, but then they wander upon a subject that I think is strangely foreign to sort of the way that atheistic people approach problems. So here's a quote from a very famous atheist Richard Dawkins. And as you read through this quote, what you'll see is that he's not objecting to the evidence of God, the objectivity. Is there a God or is there not a God, right? That's an objective question. What he's arguing about is the quality of this God, the attractiveness of this God. In other words, the morality of this God. And I find that fascinating that every atheist does resort at some point to throwing jabs at how horrible the God in the Bible is, or the God in the Quran, or the Jewish God, right? And to me, it just indicates that, like it or not, no matter how materialistic you are, the religious investigation that you conduct, the religious question, is as much an objective question as it is a moral question. Or as much a moral question as, like it is both. It is an objective pursuit or an objective investigation. It is also a moralistic investigation. For some reason, even the hardest of scientific people will eventually throw a jab at the goodness of God. So there is an inevitable subjectivity to this investigation, and I would say that is true categorically. There's some sense in which when I say it's subjective, the scientist in me, the materialist in all of us just says, oh, so it's just a personal opinion. Okay, it's just, So God's not real, it's just whatever you make up, it's whatever you decide. And that's not exactly what I mean. What I mean is that it is categorically a subjective question. Meaning that it overflows the boundaries of the scientific method. And I'm going to get more into that. But basically, the premise of the religious endeavor, the religious investigation, the religious hypothesis, it is objective. Sure, we need to have some kind of materialistic framework because it is a materialistic question. It does affect the material, how we look at the material. But it is absolutely a moralistic question as well. It's a moral investigation. And I think because of the scope of this question, it categorically becomes a subjective investigation and not so much an objective investigation. So let's talk about that a little bit. Okay, so what do I mean when I say that the religious endeavor or this religious investigation is inherently or categorically a subjective experience? And why is that not a cop-out? Okay, so I want to bring to your mind a man named Sir Francis Bacon. And Sir Francis Bacon, you may or may not know, is actually one of the fathers of the scientific method. Now, he himself was very religious, and it was his dedication to truth that really motivated him to sort of do away with all the superstitions and the mythology and the legends and the opinions that were tied up with science at the time. This is right around the beginning of the 1800s, so turn of the 19th century. And, we'll talk about the relationship between religion and science in another video, but just to say they're not necessarily in conflict. But he came up with this thing called the idols of the mind. And this is in his paper, the Novum Organum. It's a famous paper. And he talked about how there are these impediments to our ability to perceive the world. And they happen in our mind. And one of these idols, he called them idols of the mind. One of these idols was called idols of the marketplace. And I think this concept is that when we're just talking with our friends, right, just out in the marketplace of ideas, when we're arguing, debating, there's a tendency for humans to misuse different terms. We distort the meaning of things in order to maybe win an argument or to simplify an issue, or we just plain don't know what it means. And when you do this, you distort your ability to understand things, to investigate the world. So I want to talk about a few idols of the marketplace, and I think it'll illustrate this idea that the religious endeavor is inherently subjective. So there's basically three idols of the marketplace that I think enter into these discussions. And the first one is this idea of objectivity versus subjectivity. So usually the debate is something like, well, you know, I don't really believe in God because I'm an objective person. I don't see any evidence for it. And then the religious person goes, oh, well, I had this personal experience, right? It kind of goes back and forth. And I think objectivity is the first idol of the marketplace. So what I want to do is take you on a little tour of objectivity. And what you're going to see is objectivity is not such a stable thing, right? I think the notion of objectivity, the marketplace notion of objectivity, is that there is generally just one way to look out at the world. The world arranges itself or just is there, and then we open our eyes and passively perceive it. And then it's pretty much just passive, and as long as we don't have any weird biases, we're all just going to see the same thing. And it should be pretty simple, right? Like, I'm objective. What we're going to find that objectivity is not so stable as it seems. So basically this tour is brought to you by none other than Michel Foucault. So it's a postmodern guy, obviously a very materialistic guy, but he made some very interesting observations about the way we looked at the world over the last, say, 300-400 years. All right, let's take a look at this. So I'm going to take you through 3 different eras, and this is the Renaissance, right around the 15 and 1600s. 14 and 1500s. I always get those mixed up. Anyways, so here we're going to see this is a scientific observation of that time. And as you read this, what you're going to see is a certain way of looking at the world. This was considered objective. It's hard for us to imagine now, but it was. So the stars are the matrix of all the plants, and every star in the sky is only the spiritual prefiguration of a plant. Right? They're drawing these poetic analogies, what we would call poetic analogies. They saw the world as everything interconnected, all the essences of every single thing is connected with everything else. And so, right, each plant has a star in the sky, because when you look out at the flowers of the field, they look kind of like the stars in the sky. So this was science back then. This was objective. And then right, so Bacon came on the scene, Descartes came on the scene, and they were like, look, guys, whoa, we can't just be drawing all these weird hidden connections right between flowers and stars. Like, how you can't prove any of it. What we need to do then is slow this thing down. We're not going to make any hidden connections anymore. We want everything to be done step by step. We don't no more idols of the mind. And what happened was, in the classical period, they went full 180, man. They went no hidden connections at all, to the point where what? Buffon, basically a biologist. These are 2 biologists in the 1700s. Buffon criticized the Linnaean method for relying upon characters so tenuous that it rendered the use of the microscope unavoidable. You know, there's a temptation to think that it was technology. You know, if they only had better technology in the Renaissance, they would have realized that all the stuff that they were doing was stupid, and they would have, seen the light. They would have come to a more modern view of science. But it's not so simple as that, actually. There was a change in their objectivity. There was a change in how they saw the world that, if you look at this quote, it rendered the use of the microscope unavoidable. Buffon criticized. They were in controversy on whether or not to even use the microscope. And in fact, I'll read a quote here. And Turnifer thought that, this is another biologist, in order to gain a knowledge of plants, rather than scrutinize each of their variations with a religious scruple, right? Rather than try to find little differences in the plants that are so distinct, it was better to analyze them as they fall beneath the gaze. Guys, they rejected technology. The change in their objectivity occurred before any technology came into being or came into place. And in fact, you could say it was the change in objectivity that preceded the invention of the microscope, because they only wanted to trust their eyes. And in fact, the biologists of that time were so paranoid about these idols of the mind, making like subjective, opinionated observations of plants, that they didn't even use color. Color was too subjective. Yeah, and so this is like there was a change in their objectivity. Now, this led to a lot of strange conclusions, or at least strange according to us. So let's take it back here. When they took this objectivity to looking at languages, for example, there was no such thing as Romance languages. They didn't see the kinship between Italian or French with Latin. They didn't see it. Because just by looking at the word orders, they didn't want to look at anything detailed like word endings. They were only looking at the obvious differences between these languages. And there was a number of other factors that went in, but that was certainly one of them, that they didn't see the similarity between Italian and French, or Spanish for that matter, with Latin. It's a different way of looking out at the world. It's a different kind of objectivity. They're looking at the same thing as we are, but they're not coming to the same conclusion. Here's another one. Now, this is regarding economics. Read this here, right? I don't know what steroclass means, but the effect of the worker's expenditure, right? The increase in market value is the effect of the worker's expenditure, not of his work. For the idle man who expends without working produces the same effect in this respect. What is he saying here? They're saying laborers only contribute to value because of the food that they have to eat to survive. Their actual labor doesn't factor into the value of things. Like, laborers actually don't produce any value. You know, like, that's what they're saying. They didn't see, it's so hard to put yourself into their mindset. It's just not there anymore. Like, it's because they refuse to see anything that was, like, not directly connected to value, and to them, value only related to what men consumed. So, objectivity has changed throughout the course of the ages. And then what happened in the 1900s or the 1800s and 1900s, so at the turn of the 19th century, what happened was they started looking at something different. And this is why I like to use this example of a dolphin. Dolphins for a while were fish. Right around the 1800s, dolphin became mammals. And that's because of a complete shift in the way we looked at the world. The difference was we looked at internal structure. So, like, you think of this book, right? Why is this a book? You know, it's really not a book. What it is a collection of thin, pulpy wood sheets that seem to be attached here. And, you know, it's basically just a pile of papers that are stuck on one end, right? What makes this similar? Why are these grouped together? Well, because there's an internal functionality, an internal structure that unites this item together to make it into something that we call a book. And that's the same reason why dolphins are mammals, because there's an internal structure within it that's more similar to our internal structure, we're mammals, than it is to a shark. So, for example, like the respiratory system resembles more of a mammal. Their mammary glands, the way they give birth and rear their young, is much more similar to a mammal than it is to a shark. That's an internal analogical structure, a similarity, an internal analogical similarity in organic structure between mammals, across mammals. That is a different kind of objectivity. You can't even say there's an idol of the mind there. It's just they just looked at the world, or we just look at the world differently than they did when they called dolphins fish, when they didn't see the production of a laborer as providing value, when they didn't see Romance languages, when they didn't look at the color of plants. It's a different kind of objectivity. So basically, the correction then to this idol of the marketplace isn't so much subjectivity versus objectivity. It's something that I like to call, it's more of a collective subjectivity. That the way we apprehend objects in the world is done in parallel. It's a crowd. It's kind of like it's like a collective consciousness almost. You could think of it that way, but it's just that at some point, we don't know why, but at some point, the knowledge that we have based on the way we're looking at the world, the way we're arranging our visual field, it's just not working anymore. And different voices kind of pipe up, and then suddenly there's a huge shift where we all change our objectivity. We just rearrange our visual field to see it differently. And so now, instead of, right, this is a box. There's dice in here. I play D&D. Instead of this just being a rectangle with a stripe and this being a rectangle with no stripe on it, well, this is a box. This belongs together, right? They fit together. There's an internal functionality that joins these things together. Look, it's hard not to take it for granted, but this really, this is the reason why a dolphin is a mammal right here. The internal structure, the functionality of it. So the common argument is hey, you're just I'm looking at the world as is, but you're imposing meaning, right? This is what an atheist would say to a theist. I'm just looking at the evidence. You're imposing meaning. It's not quite right. You're both imposing meaning. You're overlaying a bias onto your objective senses. You have a collective subjectivity that's guiding how you arrange the objects in your visual field. And so my point there is the goal is not to be free from bias. The goal is to come up with the best bias, the best way to value objects in the world, to arrange them in the right way, such that you come out with the greatest, deepest understanding of the world. And that is a judgment call. That's a subjective decision. To a certain degree. It's done in parallel. And so we all look at it from different angles and agree together that this is the way that we should look at the world. But it is, on the face of it, it is just it's kind of a collective opinion, right? But this is how we've advanced through the world. This is how we explore the material world. Another, right, so that's one idea you can kind of work with, that you're overlaying a bias anyway. I think it's okay to experiment with different kinds of bias, a different way of interpreting the things in front of you, because we're interpreting them anyway. There's no one is safe. I like to say there's no safe ground to stand on. We're all taking a risk. We're all collectively just guessing at how we're supposed to see the world, based on a lot of experience, but okay. The second thing is this idea of the scientific method. And the scientific method is wielded around. To me, it's almost become, for an atheist, it's become like this magical deity. The oracle of all knowledge. Oh, scientific method, please tell us what is knowledge and what is not. Tell us what all things are, oh, scientific method. And people wield this term as if it's appropriate in all situations. And if you've ever read a research paper, it is hard as hell to prove anything with a scientific method. You have to isolate and observe and isolate and demonstrate and strip away and run double-blind tests, and it takes so much time to peel away unnecessary bias, and then you have to run regressions and then submit it for peer review. It is... My mom's boyfriend is a researcher, and whenever he publishes a paper, it's like a big deal. This guy spends thousands of hours a year, and he might come up with 2-3 papers, if that. So it's a very, very difficult method. It's meant to isolate a single variable and then show causation of a single mechanism. And so just to say, the scientific method, it's wielded around as if it's some kind of universal solvent, right? Some kind of magical deity that can tell us everything. But in reality, I think it's an idol of the marketplace. I think the scientific method is only useful in very specific situations. It assumes, for it to be relevant, you have to be able to observe. You have to have some level of control over the observation of the phenomenon you're trying to investigate. And then kind of along with that, you have to be able to isolate and have control over, you have to have access to that information. We don't even need to get into quantum stuff because I don't understand it, but basically the act of observing changes the state of the domain. So actually observing, so when you observe something, it changes it. So now you can't really observe it. But never mind that. Where this gets a little sticky is when you move from objects to subjects. the investigation of subjects is actually kind of hard. When you think of like psychology, in some sense, it is scientific, but it's not scientific in the way that physics is scientific, or even economics, right? Or philology. These are the kind of the investigation of the behavior of subjects. And subjects are hard to observe. I can't just lock you in a room and stick you under a microscope for 14 hours a day and then, at whatever time I want to, call you back in 3 hours later and start probing you again. I can't put a camera in your home and observe every single one of your behaviors. I think that's why nutrition has become such a hotly debated topic. Everyone's got their own theory on what you're supposed to do. You should eat organic. You shouldn't have oat milk. And I guess oat milk is bad for you now, right? There's all these weird, in my mind, sort of distortive idols of the marketplace within nutrition. But it's just to say the scientific method, it's not this magic wand where you can just apply it in any and every situation. I think it gets overwhelmed easily. Certainly by nutrition. I mean, we made advances, but psychology, right? You have to depend more on tradition, more on a collective subjectivity. It's more of a craft where tradesmen trade notes with each other. It's not strictly scientific like chemistry. And so, right, when it comes to subjects, we're kind of getting close to what I mean by it. It's sort of just categorically subjective. There's just no way to apply a strict scientific method on things and to gain evidence of things. And a lot of psychological studies they're kind of subjective. Like in my practice, I had this many patients and this was the result, and then people sort of talk it over, and then collectively we come to some kind of agreement that, yeah, this is the best practice. So scientific method is another idol of the marketplace. It should not be the sole arbiter that determines what things are, what things aren't. It's only useful in certain situations. And so then you could say, okay, Steve, well then how should we go about it? What should be the criteria beyond just, oh, well, I believe in Santa Claus because I like Santa Claus, right? Like, how do we do this? So, right, this moves further into the idea of the religious endeavor, the religious investigation as categorically subjective. Another word that people toss around that I think is an idol of the marketplace is non-falsifiable. It just sounds like such a cool word. Like, you invoke this term, you suddenly become this unerring arbiter of truth, this unbiased investigator who will, bring clarity past all these superstitious religious people, right? The only problem is, there are certain categories of knowledge that categorically are just not falsifiable. I would say psychology sort of falls into that. I mean, and the more specifically subjective you get, for example, what career should you have? Who should you fall in love with? Who should you marry, right? Because the details of who you are as a subject are so unique and varied, there's no 1 + 1 = 2 equation that you can lean on to answer this question. It's sort of categorically unfalsifiable. Think of the question of God, the nature of the cosmos. I mean, how do we quantify these things? How is it measurable? How do we control the observation? It's one thing I want to know from atheists is okay, well, what is the God hypothesis exactly? Well, I think it's an all-knowing, all-powerful consciousness that potentially is responsible for the entire fabric of being, right? And that this all-powerful force is a personality, right? It's a being that has likes and dislikes and has preferences, right? It's a subject, is what it's basically the grand hypothesis is that reality in its entirety is essentially infused with a subject, like a person, a really big, powerful person, right? That's essentially the God hypothesis. And I'm like, well, okay, non-falsifiable. Okay, well, what wouldn't be falsifiable? I mean, tell me the experiment that you're going to run that is going to prove the existence of God. It's kind of like proving that your mother loves you. I mean, you can sort of do it, but it's kind of inappropriate. It's like if I ask you how you're doing and you pull out a calculator. It's like that. Okay, that's not really. I don't know how you're supposed to measure How do you measure that? And then the idea of like controllable observation, like, okay, you're going to get God and just, okay, God, just show up in this petri dish here under my microscope, and I'm just going to probe you a little bit. I want you to show up when I want you to, and then when, show up when I don't want you to, not show up when I don't want you to. And it's like, I don't see how that's logical. How is that rational? I think what you kind of have to admit is that we don't have control over this observation. So the God investigation, I would recommend to you, do not conduct it as if it were an objective investigation, unless you were to say that, take a Sir Francis Bacon perspective, or countless scientists who look at the structure of the universe and see an intelligent creator, an intelligent design. I mean, I think that makes sense. But if you want God to suddenly show himself to you through some experiment where you manipulate his appearance, I just think that's it's kind of an arrogant, foolish way to approach the situation. What I think is much more reasonable is to approach it from, again, this collective subjectivity. This is what I'm saying. It's the religious endeavor is inherently a subjective endeavor. It's categorically subjective, but that doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, well, I just, I want everything to be roses, and I want God to grow money on trees, and everyone, it's not like that. You still need to subject that to the collective subjectivity, the collective tradition of people who have seen the universe as a subject as a result of a diffuse consciousness that permeates all of reality, right? All these ideas. So Joseph Campbell took a very subjective approach to this idea of religion, and he kind of investigated our collective subjectivity, which were the stories that we told, the different ideas that entire cultures looked up to, which would be like their religious symbols or their mythologies. And basically every culture from around the world for all of history, probably dating back hundreds of thousands of years, has believed in reality as a subject, not as an object. As made up of fundamentally made up of forces that have a consciousness and therefore personality. So that should, that could give you some comfort in venturing forth into making this investigation. And also, like, there have been tons of scientists who have come to a belief in God, and that belief didn't interfere with their objectivity or their materialistic investigations. It actually supercharged it. It inspired it. It made it better. And so, you're in good company if you're an atheist or more materialistic, and you just feel that maybe there's something better out there, that there's some mode of being that will be more enriching or fulfilling for you. This path has been trodden many times by some very, very smart people, very materialistic, but people who advanced very far in the materialist worldview. Einstein, certainly Bacon, the guy who came up with the Big Bang, who first proposed that. Yeah, that was a Catholic priest who did the Big Bang Theory. So, okay, so this is the idea of, instead of thinking of the religious investigation as a strictly materialistic, objective endeavor, objectivity meaning somehow that there's only one way to look out upon the world that's free from bias, but kind of modifying that to say, well, no, we're looking for the right kind of bias. It's impossible to see the world without bias. Another example is like you're looking at this screen, right? What are you looking at? You're probably looking at my face. You're not really looking at the paintings. That's in the background, right? You have a hierarchy of attention. You value here because this is where the most meaning comes from, and then you have these other parts in your visual field in the background. That's a bias. That's a personal bias, right? So you can't see the world without a bias. Okay, so then the question is, what overlay, what system of values do I impose upon the world so that I gain a richer understanding of the nature of the world? That's the real question. And that you can do by looking at the collective subjectivity that's happened in the past, or that's happening right now, right? Religious traditions, mythological traditions. I think those are all valid ways to explore this question. Okay, so that's religion, the religious investigation as categorically subjective. It's a subjective question. you are investigating a subject, you will probably encounter it in a very personally subjective way, and that's okay, so long as I think you're kind of balancing that or checking that off against the collective subjectivity, the ancestral knowledge, the realm of tradition that's happened before you and is happening right now. The other part of the religious investigation that's unavoidably so is going to be that it is essentially a moral investigation. And that can mean a number of things. I think part of it is like, is it even attractive? Like, what are the stakes? What do I get for it? You know? Because on some level, faith, I mean, I hate to say this, but like on some level, faith is kind of like the guy that buys a lottery ticket, right? There's like no chance you're going to win that motherfucker. There's no chance you're going to win the lottery. Like, but even as I say that, right, if it reaches 800 million or 2 billion, whatever it comes to, there's still a part of me, guys. There's still a part of me that kind of wants to buy that freaking ticket. But like, there's some, at some point the numbers become so big that we no longer can comprehend them. And it's like, I think winning the lottery, it's like it's the same odds as getting struck by lightning 4 times in a row, or there's some absurd parallel to it. We still buy it, right? Why? Because it just seems so good. And so I'm going to first just talk about why I think you should pursue a religious investigation just from an attractiveness standpoint, and then talk a little bit about the moral endeavor, and then we'll kind of wrap up. So a lot of people, when they think about religion, they think about sitting in a church over a really long ceremonial process, a bunch of rules that are kind of irrelevant. You know, like, should I masturbate? Should I not masturbate? Or whatever. You know, like, should I eat this? Should I not eat that? Should I have sex before marriage? Right? All these different rules. It feels kind of irrelevant. Now I have to hate certain people, right? I become this bigoted person. Like, you're a Hindu, you're going to hell. You're a Muslim, you're okay. You're a Jew, you're definitely going to, it's like, you don't want to be that person, right? It seems really unattractive, really cumbersome, just kind of like annoying and bullshitty, right? Okay, I want to give you a different vision of religion. This is how I experience it, okay? Think of like Conan the Barbarian, all right? Or think of like, I don't know, Conan just popped into my head, but it's like a combination between a Navy SEAL and Lord of the Rings. Okay, this is just my own personal subjective experience with it, but I think it involves a sense of quest and magic, Lord of the Rings, but it also involves a sense of noble and dignifying sacrifice, which is like the Navy SEAL. What's a noble and dignifying sacrifice? It's like you were called to be strong, stronger than other men, that you are somehow heroic. You were called to a level of performance and power that you're not sure you can do. But if you can somehow pass this heroic test, right, the Navy SEAL training, where I heard it's so bad that, like, your toenails fall out. Dude, I ain't doing that training. That's not me. But I really admire that intensity. And I take that mentality to this channel. And I see my life as kind of like this Navy SEAL, where I'm called to make this ultimate sacrifice for the benefit of others. It is ultimately the call of the other that ennobles your life. And that's this idea of, like, in order to find your life, you have to lose it, right? These different imagery. This is from the Christian tradition, but I don't think that's solely just Christian. I think a lot of traditions recognize that, the idea of sacrifice as ennobling. And then this Lord of the Rings factor, where it's like, dude, if you see the universe as a subject infused with a consciousness that ultimately is out for your good, but that requires things of you, life, using that lens, using that frame to interpret the events in your life, when you violate your conscience, when you've behaved improperly, and then certain events happen where it just feels more than just consequence, right? It feels like something is talking to you. It just feels like that. Again, that's a personal subjectivity, but that is a collectively subjective experience. To feel that, you can call it the universe, God, reality is actually talking to you. Dude, that is fucking cool, man. That's exciting. That's neat. And that's what makes me want to share it with people. And the fact that it's in the pursuit of a noble endeavor, that your life is on a quest. And so when I wake up in the morning, everything I do, from making breakfast to cleaning my room to grocery shopping to paying the bills to balancing my budget, right? You're probably falling asleep even listening to this list. I find it kind of exciting because to me these are the pillars that I need to put in place in my life so that so that I can make this ultimate sacrifice for, in my case, I have a Christian, I subscribe to the Christian tradition. I say for the glory of him, for him, to get his, I don't know, to please him. It's hard. It feels so weird to say that, but it's hard to describe. But it's like, sometimes I want to cry just thinking about it. Like, it really pumps me up. It really just hits me in a spot that I can't describe. And so my life is suffused with meaning. And so that's, to me, what's at stake here. If you don't have that experience of life, why not pursue it? Like, you don't have to become this horrible curmudgeon religious asshole. Like, that's not what I'm proposing for you. What I'm proposing for you is that your life is in a quest, that the best way to see your life is as a quest, that you should evaluate and orient all the experiences of your life as part of your quest. And that means your life has a story and a purpose. And that this consciousness that wants you to accomplish its purpose for you is going to warp the universe around you so that you can accomplish it. And that's the story that I'm talking about, man. That is the story that I'm talking about, So that's part of the moral endeavor. Again, I think of Dawkins. I think of any atheist conversation I've ever had. The objection that the God in the Bible or the God in the Quran or the God in the Jewish Bible, or all these different things, that they're bad, that they are unattractive, that they're distasteful on some very deep level, and that religious people are distasteful, right? I submit to you that is the right way to approach the question. That you are making a moral investigation as much as you are an objective investigation. That you should use that as a criteria for evidence of or against the existence of an all-powerful consciousness that pervades the universe. And I think that the final evidence, the most salient evidence that you have stumbled upon the right thing, is that your life gets better. Not materially necessarily, not even health-wise necessarily, right? You might still suffer as much as you ever have. You might even suffer more. But the difference is something inside you has changed. That the way you see your life isn't just so you can, like your purpose is much higher now. It's not just so you can just keep on living. It's not just for you, That there's something grand that you're supposed to accomplish. That's, I think, when you have that sense, you have stumbled closer to the truth, and its beauty will draw you in. The religious investigation, the religious endeavor is less like a man in a lab coat trying to isolate variables and isolate causation. It's less like that and more like, what should you do with your life? Who should you fall in love with? What's your favorite color? I mean, I think it's more like that than it is, right? Because this question, it overwhelms the scientific method. I'm not saying you shouldn't use logic. I'm just saying this notion of like this tiny little controllable phenomenon that you somehow, right? That's not it. That's not how you're going to get there. That's not how Ian Hersey got there. That's not how any number of scientists who are religious got there. That's not how Bacon got there. So I hope this has been useful for your journey. Again, I I just honestly, I sincerely hope that you reach a better place every single day. And I'm going to start a study on the book of John. And anyways, you'll see a number of religious videos on this channel. And yeah, I hope you find something useful here. So, all right.